Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmad. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Ben Levy, if I haven't told you this before, one of my favorite clients of all time. And of course, no, you'll hear that on every interview that we do, right? No, I'm just
saying that can't be true.
No, genuinely, you're a highlight. You're on the highlight reel, man.
I appreciate that, but I mean, there have been scores of clients. There must be some other folks as well. That
I didn't say the only one. I said one of.
I appreciate
one of a couple of hundred. My favorite. I'm just kidding. No, you're up there. You're up there for a whole bunch of reasons, which I think are going to become pretty self-evident here today. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to tell your story. Let's start here. Give folks a quick intro on who you are and what you do today. What's the business like today? And then we'll talk about where it came from.
Sure. So I am Ben Levy. I am the single owner operator of Sell It Great, which is a consultancy that helps creatives and ad agencies have better meetings so that they can sell better work. And this means that I am constantly teaching people how to use slides or not use slides, as the case may be, how to put together a story, and how to handle all of the awkward conversations that can come from attempting to show up with slides and a story that your client maybe doesn't expect.
And ultimately, the result or the benefit of working with you is they're going to sell more work.
They're going to sell more work, and they're going to sell the work that they want to make. Oftentimes, one of the criticisms that people will have of the agency space is, oh, we're only selling safe work. We brought 3 ideas and they picked the worst one. Well, all right. So let's talk about how to change that. Let's make sure that you're making the stuff you can proudly sign your name to.
How did this all begin? Tell me that story.
It started because I was a god-awful presenter. I'm a copywriter by training. I'm an advertising creative director. And that meant that my training was all around how to write and how to think up crazy concepts. At no time did anybody tell me how to then walk into a room and sell those concepts. And I hit a point in my career where that became one of my responsibilities. And it was throw in the deep end and see how it goes. And it's true for almost everybody. And I was lucky enough to have some folks around me who had some natural gifts in terms of presenting and having presence in the room. And so I was able to start taking notes and watching what they were doing. But for a good year and a half, I honestly thought that my role in these sorts of things was just to sit there and say and do nothing. Just to be wallpaper and let the client choose what was right. And I had one boss who said, you could be a little more excited about the work. And I thought he meant talk louder. So I presented like this for 6 months and nothing changed. And ultimately, and it took about 5 years of watching, of reading, of practicing on myself, I got better. And then I had a different problem, which was that now the agencies I worked at, because I was one of the few folks who understood how to present and who had a provable track record of success in these scenarios, I was thrown in every single meeting there was. And I wasn't able to do all of the other things that I had to do, like that writing, like manage the department that I was brought on for. And so out of sheer desperation, I went to management and said, I'm going to train up 4 or 5 other folks to do what I do. And I sat down and wrote everything out that I thought I was doing and created a syllabus. And I started coaching some coworkers. And that syllabus escaped the building. And, a friend sent it to a spouse, sent it to whoever. And I started getting phone calls. Hey, is this a thing you do? Can you come do this for us?
I'm curious what existed at the time in terms of training on this topic.
Almost nothing. I have the gift of being in a niche that is very, very shallow. There's not a whole lot of direct competitors for what I do. Plenty of people who are public speaking coaches, plenty of people who will talk about how a traditional business might want to set up a meeting. But this is an area of the advertising world that has been long ignored. And there was nobody out there doing this kind of training. If you were super, super lucky, then you had a boss that thought about this in a strategic and analytical way and was also enough of a teacher that they could pass some of it on to you. But that's incredibly rare. And while there's perhaps 3 or 4 other names I can think of that have done this kind of work, I know for a fact one of them is retired. And the other, I've had clients tell me, I don't know how long it's been since they've been in the room, but I know that you're still working actively today. So I want somebody who understands the challenges that we face to come in and tell us what we should be doing about them.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And so what was the moment, or when rather was the moment when you realized, oh, I got a business here?
It was a couple of those phone calls. You know, one person calling who's a friend of a friend, you go, yeah, sure, glad you thought it was interesting. But when it started to become 2 or 3, it was, oh, all right, there's demand for this outside of just my world. And it started to become the sort of thing where if I wanted to do it, and I enjoy teaching and enjoy mentoring, it was going to start to cut into the time that I was spending on my real job, right, on my full-time gig. And that's when I had to sort of take a look at this and go, okay, if this is going to fill up my schedule enough that it actually conflicts with my job as a full-time creative director, then this could be a job in its own right.
Yeah. And then what was the impetus to actually do that? Was there, did you just jump ship and start? Were there, any other factors at play?
So there was a lot going on in my personal life. The agency world is not, things are starting to change, but the agency world traditionally is not friendly to family life.
What personal life? What are you talking?
Yes.
Agency world?
Tell me more about this personal life of which you speak. If you don't,
agency and personal don't seem to go there. Where's the Venn diagram intersect there? I don't understand.
Yeah, listen. If you don't show up on Saturday, don't bother coming in Sunday. Right? That was the mentality, and I had been fighting that to a greater or lesser extent for years at that point in my career, and I was at a place where I had the opportunity to run an agency. And I realized that I was going to adopt a new family of 50 employees and try and care for them and mentor them. And to me, that was what that role meant, that they were going to be my responsibility. And if I did that, then I was going to be a pretty poor husband and father to the 3 people in my life who were there before those 50 people. But if I took this step to the side, I could stay with the thing that I loved. I could continue to mentor and coach people, which is something that I care about. And I could set a lot more control over my life than in a large company where there's only so much that you set the boundaries, you can do those things. And there are people who do it far better than I do. But this was an opportunity for me to build it from the ground up and say, okay, what's sustainable for myself and for my family? And so that was a big impetus to take that step.
Tell me about the early days, those messy early days where you don't have a paycheck coming in and you've got to drum up new business. How did that go?
Yeah, it was interesting for me because I took that step, but I didn't burn the bridges behind me. Right? So there was a period of several months where I probably had Sell It Great, this new business, in name only. And I was spending almost all my time freelancing. So some things had changed, but functionally, I had a hobby more than I had a business. And then I would say about 3 months into that, I was very consciously sort of turning off the spigot on the freelance work and trying to open the tap when it came to doing the coaching and consulting. And I had managed to write 5 figures in proposals, and I was very excited. And it was a mix of previous coworkers who were now running their own agency, and maybe they were giving me more of a shot than I even deserved. And then 1 or 2 people who had heard about me through reputation alone. And I remember that it was 4 or 5 contracts, and they had all sort of hit at once. And the same week that I was ready to send them out to get signed was the same week that COVID shut the world down. So that, you want to talk about the money's not coming in those early days. I think even worse in some ways than not having anything was to have it right there. And I remember having to sort of talk to myself in the car on the way back from something, going, I probably shouldn't send that contract out, right? Like I'm pretty sure that they have other things in their mind. They don't even know if they're coming back to the office. We don't know how long this is lasting for. I can't do this right now. And it was scary. I gave myself the rope to say, look, this isn't under your control. So give it some time and see what happens. But you can only do that for so long. Eventually, if this is going to be real, you got to make it real. And so the silver lining to all of that is that it can be very difficult for folks to admit what they don't know. And that's, in a sense, what I'm selling. It's someone coming to me. There's been some moment of crisis where they've said, I can't step into another room and have it turn out that way. Or I can't continue in my career being ignored or being this scared. And that can be a really difficult thing for folks to square with. But when the pandemic hit and everybody was suddenly presenting through cameras, you got a safer narrative. And all of a sudden people would call me and say, yeah, I don't really understand how to present on camera. And I was like, well, that's because you've never really thought about how to present, period. This changes things, don't get me wrong, but there's some foundations that work for both. And so that wound up being a blessing in disguise, because folks were able to open that conversation without feeling like they were shaming themselves. And things started to build again. And agencies would reach out and say, can you help us with this one thing? One of the mistakes I made early days, I tried to sell all of my friends on my packages, because I thought, these people know me. They know that I'm good in the room. They know what I have. This should be easy. And they don't need what I have for one reason or another. Either they're not at that moment to sell, or they are good enough on their own and they don't need to stick their neck out so far that they just bring me in for the sake of this new thing I've started. But I remember feeling more depressed about that in some ways than I did about anything else in the early days. This thought of, well, if I can't sell my friends, my former partners on this thing, how am I going to possibly sell anyone else? Which we've talked about this in 90 Day Pipeline, is not, you're talking to the wrong audience. They weren't the ones who were ready to buy. They weren't the ones who needed it. Yeah, they worked in the same industry I did, but they were not at that point of, I can't walk into one more room and have it go like this. And so that, I think, as much as the pandemic, as much as anything else, slowed me down initially, that I didn't understand truly who I was talking to.
Was that the kind of the set of circumstances that made you think, well, I probably need to go outside of my network at this stage and drum up some new relationships? Is that when you started taking that more seriously?
I think the thing that was a tipping point for me, the moment that would eventually result in us meeting, was that I finally got what to me felt like a great month. I had $15,000 in billing for a month, and it came from 2 clients, and one of them was a recommendation from a previous client. And I felt like this is what a real business looks like. It's not I've scraped together this one thing, or after a 6-month conversation, I got this. Like, multiple people are picking up the phone, reaching out to me, and they've already sort of made up their mind almost before I've even spoken to them. And I realized that, I think that was a February. I realized I had no idea how to duplicate that in March. That even though this had happened and I'd reached this, what felt like a really important moment in the history of my business, I had no idea how to duplicate it. It could not cause it to happen a second time. And that was the thing that made me go, okay, what just happened? And how do I build that on purpose? How do I make that a repeatable system that I can rely on and expect, oh, good, this is the amount of money that I'll make over this period of time? And it was one of the things that made me recognize that I feel like I have a whole lot of gifts and benefits coming into this space. What I mean by that is I'm a trained advertising creative. I'm a trained writer. I know how to build a voice, how to build a brand, how to put messaging out there on social. From the outside, it probably looks like I have everything I need to start a new business. And yet, even with that, even in a space where there was very little competition, even in a space that I knew was being underserved in the industry, I was still at a loss to figure out how to turn it into a business. Who am I really talking to? What are the layers of communication that need to happen between I have a business and you giving me money? And me delivering on that, right? What is that supposed to look like? Because there's different ways to do it. And I remember having conversations in those early years around, I kept wanting to do one-on-one coaching because it brought me such joy, and it still does. But we had conversations about the fact that there's an upper limit to that. There's a hard stop that happens if you are the only person capable of delivering that service. There's only so many of your hours in the day. And so things like that I didn't know, as I started to see the shape of my blank spots in terms of my skill set, that was what made me start to realize, okay, I need to start reaching out further and seeing something beyond just this industry that I've spent my whole career in. Other stuff is going on here.
So what I'm hearing from you is you obviously had confidence in your technical expertise, and in your case, teaching creatives how to sell and pitch effectively. You knew how to do that. You had confidence in that. You enjoyed doing that, and you came to this realization that, well, there's a whole other set of skills as a business owner that I need to learn and master and acquire in order for this to be a sustainable business. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I have a very specific set of skills, and they're only getting me halfway to where I want to be. was the issue.
At what point, I'm just curious in the timeline from when you first launched and went independent, when does this realization dawn upon you, roughly?
It's almost a year in, I think, maybe a little bit less, that I felt like in that first year, especially with COVID and the world kind of flipping itself on its head for a bit, I was willing to give myself the leeway of 12 months to figure out what the shape of this thing should be. And after 12 months, I had learned a lot. and I could see the growth that I'd made. I was honest with myself about that, but I was also honest with myself that this wasn't going to turn into a business overnight. And so I felt like I was faced with the choice of continue to grow at a snail's pace and call what was essentially a side hustle my job, or go find somebody who had the playbook. Go find someone that could point out all the things that I didn't even know I didn't know, and turn this into the actual income stream that it was supposed to be.
So what do you do next? Where do you go? Who do you find? And I'm curious, I want to get into a kind of a more specific articulation of what are the skills that you then had to gain?
Sure. I wandered around the internet briefly in a way that is, it sort of felt like when you've got a twinge in your leg and you go on WebMD to see like, what should I be looking for? I mean, like if you go out and try to figure out what am I doing wrong in my business, just the cacophony of voices is not at all helpful. And I don't remember the exact moment that I stumbled on one of your videos or the site itself. I don't remember how that exact moment came about, but I remember spending probably 2 or 3 weeks stalking all the free stuff that was out there. And then I had another really honest conversation with myself, because particularly as somebody whose business was not making the money that I wanted it to be making at that time, I had to sit down and say, okay, I can maybe follow everything that this guy's putting out for 3 years. And after 3 years, I bet I'll put together a fairly coherent picture of what the approach is, and this stuff will make an impact, and I'll be able to learn enough other things from books or whatever that I can cross-reference, and I can kind of see what's being said here, maybe, in 3 years. And that's if I don't want to spend any money at all. Or I can invest that really good month that I had, and I can get access to somebody that knows the questions and knows the answer to those questions, and I can start making the kinds of growth, not even financially, but just as a business owner, as a consultant. I can start making the kind of growth that I've made in the last year, week by week, and really level up and really move things ahead. And it really was a conversation in my own mind with myself. I think I did everything but say both parts out loud of, are you really going to do this? Are you going to take what represented sort of the best month I've ever had and immediately go invest it back in the business? And I had to be honest with myself that taking another year, let alone 3 years, to try and absorb everything I didn't know through osmosis was not going to get me where I wanted to go. And it wasn't just about, for me, it's not just about where I want to go, but it's about the impact that I want to have. If I want better work to get into the world, if I want more people to go through their careers without suffering what I suffered through, and I do want both those things, then it's not okay to take the long path if there's a shorter, smarter path right there.
So let me ask you this, and I don't want to turn this into a. So tell me, Ben, why did you invest in the 90-day pipeline? Right, like that's not the it's not the intent of this conversation by any means. But I do want to underline though, and talk a little bit more about making that investment because I do find this is something that people struggle with, and this is not about, us or my program or anything like that, but in the early stages, people struggle with making investments into the growth of their business. And I imagine you had a great month, and it was a month, and it was, first year is always a little bit rocky, right? Ups and downs, ups and downs. How did you overcome the fear of parting with resources that you didn't necessarily know were going to come back to you quickly?
For me, it really felt like it had reached a point where I couldn't keep going the way that I was, or I was going to be pretending. Again, I gave myself that year to make mistakes, to struggle, and in a certain sense, because there's always struggle and there's always mistakes that you're making. But I gave myself a year to find some kind of rhythm. And that time was up. Right? Within a year, I'd managed to have what I felt like was a really good month, but I didn't know how I got it, and I couldn't make it happen again, which meant that next year was going to be the same as this year. And so I didn't just see it as a choice between keeping money or spending money. I saw it as a choice between truly making this my new job or lying to myself. Because it wasn't going to change significantly if I didn't make an equally significant change. And I don't know that I would have been strong enough to do it if I didn't have that month. I don't know what would have happened then. But it just so happened that month was good enough that I felt like, okay, the business has at least earned its ability to invest in itself. So I'll go ahead and do that. Ultimately, I looked at it as the difference between taking a shot at having more months like that or just crossing my fingers.
And I think that month is significant, not only in terms of the revenue, which I'm sure helped, but also I imagine in terms of the belief, right? Because if I did that once, then all of a sudden now it's the pipe dream is no longer a pipe dream. It's something real and tangible I've now experienced, and therefore I have a higher degree of belief that I could possibly re-engineer that outcome again and again and again.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The imposter syndrome is universal. I think most people feel like it's just me. We all have this. Unless you're some kind of psychopath, we're all dealing with imposter syndrome. And those early days, I remember one of the first calls I had, somebody who outranks me, right? My professional career height is creative director. I've never been an executive creative director or a chief creative officer or any of that. And I remember talking to somebody who was a chief creative officer, a CCO, and in the course of the conversation, they said, without sarcasm or irony, you're the expert. And I think I literally bit my tongue to stop from laughing and being self-deprecating about it, because it felt so strange to me. But you're right, it was in that month where enough people in a row called me up and looked to me for the expertise in this narrow space where I knew more than they did. And that was also a big moment to have that belief in myself and in the program. Because I was confident that what I was teaching would work for at least some people. But that there was an element of critical mass there, that enough people all at once believed in it too, that, okay, invest in that business.
Those little proof points go a long way. And you're reminding me of, one of the first 5 clients inside 90 Day Pipeline, one of our beta clients was the former managing partner of an Ernst & Young office in Germany. Okay. And yeah. At that point, I am maybe 4 or 5 years out from being a senior consultant at Ernst & Young, which is basically bottom of the totem pole, right?
Yeah.
And here's a guy who at Ernst and Young, I wouldn't even be able to talk to him. we wouldn't be in the
Yeah.
same meeting. Like
Yeah.
he would outrank me by 5-6 levels, like 20 years at least my senior. Like it's a joke. He was managing partner of his office at the firm. And now he's a client. And now he's asking me questions. And now I'm getting it was wild of an experience. And to your point, I think a similar outcome for me. It really validated that, oh, okay, I got something here that, you know, frankly, people that I wouldn't have been able to talk to 5 years ago are now paying me for. That's got to be worth something.
That's one of the things where it's now become commonplace for me 4 or 5 years out to have those experiences. And I now just smile to myself about them. But the first time that happens, it's a complete head trip.
Yeah, 100%. So Ben, tell me this, and I want to get into an articulation here of what are some of those skills, right? Because on the front end of this, you told me you started off with pretty strong confidence on your technical expertise and the delivery of the service to the clients, and you knew what you were doing there. And then you hit this wall where you realize there are certain skills that you don't have to turn this into a business. And then you go off and you start searching for those skills. That included working with us. But I'd love for you to articulate for me, and if you could name them, it'd be great, right? Like what are those 1, 2, 3 skills that really made the difference for you and helped you turn this into a real business?
Yeah. I think one of the big ones, and I've experienced it as I talk to other consultants and folks trying to set out and build something like this, it feels like it's universal, is really establishing your delivery system, figuring out what your product or services actually are, not just in terms of what you do, but in terms of how you talk about it to somebody. Because we're always at a disadvantage being the creator of something like this. We know everything. We could sit and talk for hours about why it's valuable and what you get out of it. But how do you explain that to somebody else? And these days, I can talk about the various services I offer, one line for each. And I can include in there what you should be thinking about as a potential client of mine in terms of whether one or the other is right for you. But early days, what do, Ben? Oh, well, I come in and our first session is going to be like this, and then the second session will be like this, and the third session will be like this. And by that time, I've completely lost them. So figuring out how to talk about what I do and what it means for clients, prospective clients, that delivery system, that was a major piece. And I probably thought I had it, but looking back, I didn't. Another thing that was maybe more unique to me, but equally important, was the idea of putting yourself out there, the power positioning, the say your piece, stand for something, and then let people self-select and come to you. Again, I'm not a natural presenter. Nobody believes this of me anymore, but if we were to meet in person, I would not start a conversation with you. I do not talk to strangers on the street. I really, really struggle with things that feel like selling, says the guy who owns a company called Sell It Great, which meant that I didn't want to cold call people. I didn't want to interrupt somebody's dinner and go, hey, how you feeling about your meetings? Could they be better? And so this idea of power positioning, this idea of sharing your message, your offering in a way that resonates and educates and entices people to talk to you was incredibly transformative. And I don't know that it's something I would have picked up in the same way. Do I know how to put things out there and write and make funny videos? Sure. But I don't think that I would have positioned them in a way that was both helpful and enticing, or entertaining and useful. And that it shocks people constantly to find out that I don't don't really do any outbound messaging. There's systems in place that help me to reach folks, and I'm not talking about like a LinkedIn pod, but I don't sit there and shoot messages at folks, 30, 40 times an hour. And I think the third thing that was a really key piece for me was understanding the limitations of scale that can come with starting a business. And some of that we talked about before when I was saying, if I want to only work one-on-one, well, now I'm limited by the number of hours in the day. But there's also limitations that I learned about that came up in conversations around what are you prioritizing? You can prioritize profit, you can prioritize growth, but you can't really prioritize both at the same time. Not if you want to make any real progress in one of them. And that's the sort of thing that I didn't know. That's the sort of thing where I would have attempted to both grow my business and grow my profit and become absolutely lost and angry trying to do both simultaneously if I didn't know better. And I'll throw in a bonus one, which I think it's not necessarily a core teaching, but it is the sort of thing that came up again and again and again and was tremendously helpful in the program for me, which is that we as humans are fantastic at self-sabotage. When it comes to things that scare us, we are so gifted at convincing ourselves that there's 101 reasons to put it off until later. And to have another voice or a series of voices to help call you on that BS, for me, there was nothing like it. And I still have the sticky note on my desk from some of those sessions where it was, here's the ways that we could be sabotaging ourselves. Have you tried to redo your website for the 4th time this week? Yeah, that's not getting you new business, right? That also played a massive, massive role in helping me to direct my energy where it should go.
I seem to recall that I did a mindset lesson once titled "How to Lose Clients" and how to lose business and alienate clients, or something.
something like that. Yeah.
Which is about self-sabotage, which is, I think, maybe partially what you're referring to. But yeah, I remember that vividly. Ben, I'm conscious of time. You and I could probably go a lot longer, and there's a lot of interesting threads here I'd like to pull at further, but that's all the time we have for today. We might have to have you back on for another deep dive into some of those lessons, but I certainly appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Folks can go and find Ben, by the way, on LinkedIn. Is probably a good place to do it. He's quite prolific. Give him a search, Ben, Ben Levy, Levy. Ben, thank you. Hey, folks, I got Ben Levy here. We just recorded a podcast episode, and he's a graduate of the 90-Day Pipeline from a couple of years ago, at least, and was telling me this fantastic story about a great client that came out of a live workshop. And I know you folks, and I'm talking to you. Yeah, you clients, right? Maybe people that are not yet clients, you hesitate to do live workshops. There's a ton of fear associated with it. You're not doing it. You know you should be doing it. Enter Ben. Ben, tell them what to do, please.
So I will shortly be giving a in-depth training to a client that if they're not considered the best in the world, they're certainly considered the best in the US in this space. It is the sort of person, sort of agency that would never give me the time of day in any other circumstances, nor should they. They're at the top of their game, and I am merely pretty good in everything but this. And so I've been doing the free workshops for a while. About every month, every 2 months, I run one, and it's the same one. And it's half an hour long, and I know what I'm doing now at the back of my hand. And I saw 2 folks from this particular agency sign up. And I remember having to actually call a friend and say, what do I do if they're there? Because I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep my composure. And for good or for bad, they didn't show up to the workshop live, but the deal that I make is if you register for the workshop, if you're there live, there's a Q&A at the end that only you get to participate in. If not, then for a week, I'll leave a recording up. And so at some point they caught the recording, and within a week of that, they reached out and we started talking about, did it make sense for me to work with them? And I know for a fact that I was not the only name in the hat. I know that there were other folks that I was contending with. And that free workshop not only let them know some of what I do, it also gave them a very clear insight into who I am and how I talk and how I approach these things. And I would even argue that that was not my finest discovery call for a variety of reasons, some of which were under my control, some of which weren't. But again, the benefit of the live workshop is that I'd already sort of had a discovery call with them. The first part of the interview had taken place. They had made the decision. They had seen what I was about and decided, yeah, we want more of that. So I know they're uncomfortable. I know nobody likes to do their live workshops. Do your live workshops. It doesn't matter if only 2 people show up. I once had 98, I think, show up, which frankly was far too many. But I've also had 3. And just do it. If it's 3, it's practice. If it's 98, get through it. But it will lead to business. Absolutely.
Be like Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.